HarperCollins presents God's Ghostwriters by Candida Moss, read by Elliot Chapman.
Author's Note. All history challenges the historian. What is said about the past always has implications for the present and frequently involves speaking for people who are long dead and have no ability to correct later narratives. Writing a history of enslaved literate workers and the ways in which they shaped the Bible and early Christian history, however, is an especially difficult task. The archives of history only preserve fragmentary glimpses of the lives of enslaved people who lived in the ancient Roman world. Often, what evidence we have is channeled through the perspectives of enslavers who claim to speak for those they enslaved. Are the perspectives and experiences of enslaved workers there to be found, or have they been thoroughly overwritten by those who hold power? Any historian venturing into this terrain must remain vigilant. The enslaved contributions and interventions that we seek might, after all, have required the kind of agency that the conditions of enslavement made impossible. Reconstructing the experiences of enslaved people, as recent scholarship on Atlantic slavery has revealed, requires both that historians use different tools and methods and that they adjust their expectations. This process involves reading into the gaps, engaging in what historian of Atlantic slavery Saidiya Hartman calls critical fabulation, a form of history telling that is imaginative and not untrue. The evidence is fragmented, but is itself evidence. This method of history telling involves imagination, refocus, and redress. The word imagination will undoubtedly give some listeners pause, but it should not. All ancient history involves imagination. Even for famous emperors, politicians, and philosophers, the evidence is scant and hyperbolic. We sift through the tissue of archaeological and literary material and piece together portraits that stem from ourselves as much as our evidence. More than one scholar, for example, has pictured the evangelist perched at their desks, working away at their tomes in libraries or studies, books lying open to either side of them as they scratch profound thoughts onto papyrus. This image underpins numerous scholarly hypotheses about how biblical texts relate to one another, but it has a fatal flaw. Ancient writers do not seem to have used desks. We have imagined them and projected our furniture and writing habits into antiquity. All reconstructions of the ancient writing process are necessarily imaginative, and everyone who writes about the past should worry that they are writing about themselves. To be sure, I do not know this world and I cannot imagine it. In my endeavours, therefore, I have drawn upon the words of others. I am grateful for the work of other writers, record keepers, and scholars whose testimonies and studies of enslavement in other periods have been generative for my own research. I also draw upon the work of cognitive scientists and sociologists whose studies of intellection and labour help support some of the readings supplied here. It is impossible for me to credit every source in a book of this length and character, but this is a book about credit. Thus, I have created a website where additional sources and references to secondary literature can be found and where the ancient basis for my more imaginative statements is documented in a fuller way than the constraints of this book allow. I am not a novelist. I would like my readers to be able to check my impulses. In using the experiences of others from different periods in time, any historian runs the risk of turning from ventriloquist to puppeteer. But if I do not try to turn the invisible contributors pictured as writing implements and hands in our sources back into people, then these individuals and their legacy will inevitably remain abstract. I did not need to give names to the anonymous characters described in some chapters. I could have discussed the importance of certain principles in the abstract. But if I had done that, I would have obscured the power dynamics that turned the cogs of ancient society and the real people who felt their pressure. Abstractions can be useful, but they are also shorn of humanity. In thinking about how enslaved writers might have influenced and affected the contents of our Bibles, I will often, but not always, be thinking about these texts in light of enslaved experience. This should not lead us to conclude, however, either that the contributions of these collaborators were limited to the subject of slavery, or that every statement about enslavement stemmed from the enslaved writer. Nor should we assume that enslaved people are interested exclusively in slavery, or that when they are interested,
Sample complete. Ready to continue?